Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in to my channel. Before I begin, I just want to thank all of my subscribers from the bottom of my heart. I cannot tell you how much it means to me. I really appreciate it. This channel is not monetized. I am not doing this for money. I am doing this because I'm passionate about furniture, and I'm just hoping to share some of that with the world. And again, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate all your support. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. And in today's video, what I am doing is fitting half-blind dovetails. This is the half-blind side, and the drawer that I'm working on here was cut by hand with saws and chisels. The excess was chopped out with chisels. I didn't use a router or anything. You can. And I suggest you guys find whatever method works best for you. If you want to speed the process up, that's fine with me as long as you keep your accuracy high. And in this process, what I'm doing is fitting the tails, which are the maple piece, to the pins, which are the sapele piece. This drawer is made out of a mahogany subspecies called sapele and hard rock maple, and the drawer bottom is a 1/2-inch piece of maple, and it's held in with a custom piece of molding that wraps around the sides and the front that holds the drawer bottom that it fits inside of, and that is made out of wenge. So what I'm doing here is I'm fitting these parts, and I'm looking to avoid cracking my maple piece. On the tails, there's a real vulnerability if you go too fast that you'll put a crack in there, and if that happens, you just shoot some glue in there and re-glue it. It's not a big deal. If it happens when you glue up, it's permanent, and it's very hard to fix afterwards, and you certainly don't want that to happen. So I am really taking my time and getting the fit of this drawer correct. So the layout of this video is you'll see me fitting the tails and the pins on both the half line and through dovetails, and then at the end I pound the drawer together and talk a little bit about it, and then I go right to a glue up and show you what that process is like, and at the end I show you the finished product. So that's what we're going to cover today. So please bear with me, and I hope that you like what we're going to cover today. Now, when you're taking these parts on and off, it's important to not wiggle them off. There's a couple spots in the video where I do wiggle it off, but this is the correct way to take the pins out from the tails, just like this. Watch how I do it. Bam. That ensures that your joinery is not going to be sloppy. And now I am definitely not as fast as all the guys on YouTube. There are people who specialize in hand cut joinery and do it so often that they make it look easy. I am not nearly as good or as fast as them. So what I always do when I'm doing dovetails, because sometimes it'll be a time period before I actually cut them again, is I do a full-size sample. And the way I laid that out is, you'll notice the bottom has like where the half pin is on the bottom, where my thumb is. That's like 1 inch. That's like that because it references off of part of the table. These are made for sapele side tables, and that bottom part references off of a rail that has a sliding dovetail joint, and that aligns my drawer with the table legs in the compartment. And so once I figured that out, and I knew where my bottom half pin was, and I laid out my top half pin, I knew I wanted 3 pins in that space. So I found the center between the 2 half pins, and then I found the center of the 2 spaces to the left and right of the half pins, and that's how I got that layout. So the layout for the through dovetails is pretty much the same. It has 3 through dovetails and 2 half pins. And time-wise, the half blinds are taking me, they take a lot longer to fit than the through dovetails. Now this type of drawer is called a French style drawer, and if you notice how thin my sides are, that's on purpose. The real main benefits of a French style drawer are you reduce the weight, You save economically because I got both of my pieces, both of my sides out of 1 3/4 inch piece by resawing it. Incidentally, the resawing video is on my YouTube channel, and also how to turn the custom pole is on my YouTube channel. And now I am showing you how the drawer was actually fitted. So right now I am looking at the pins and tails on this corner, and I am adjusting accordingly and pairing accordingly. And there's 2 spots that you need to be concerned with: where the pins and tails meet, and then where the front of the tails butt into the sapele knife line shoulder. That needs to be done well. So the layout essentially is like this. I use a pencil to lay out the tails, or actually, let me back up. I draw everything in pencil first. I lay the pins out first, and then I transfer them to the tails. And then I cut the tails first. Now you will have to figure out which you like better, but this dilemma of what you cut first, either the tails or the pins, has raged for centuries. I, out of experience over time doing it both ways, have found that cutting the tails first ensures that you are much more accurate. So my suggestion is to try both and pick the one that works best for you. I have not had as good a luck when I cut the pins first. But on the layout part, I draw the pins first, and then I transfer them to the tails, if that makes sense. So on the first part, when you're cutting the tails, it doesn't matter if you cut past your line, because you can pare that away and make it look good, and you haven't transferred onto your sapele front yet. Once you cut the tails of the maple sides and clean out the shoulders and get it right, then you transfer those onto the sapele drawer front by knifing them on. Now, the basic tools for cutting this are some type of back saw, either a Japanese back saw or a European saw, a set of chisels that are appropriate to your size pins and tails, a cabinet hammer, a sliding bevel, a marking knife of some kind. Now, I have a Japanese knife, but it's too thick for this, so I had to make a custom one out of an old planer blade. And on your marking knife, it's very important that you only have a bevel on one side and the back side is flat. I don't use a X-Acto knife because they have 2 tapers on them and you won't get an accurate mark. And a marking gauge, and my marking gauge doesn't have a pin, it has a knife. And all the chisels and the knife and the marking gauge are honed up to 10,000 grit, which is what I recommend. But really, ideally, it should be up to 15 or 16,000 grit. If you look and watch in the video when I'm pairing and I have my chisel, the backside of it kind of face towards you, you'll notice that you can see a reflection. It looks like it's a mirror. That's because I'm honing those tools up to that point. Now, to do that, you need to put it on. You need to make sure your hollow grind off of your grinder is correct and your chisels are 90. And then you start basically 800, 1500, 3000, 6000, 8000, 10,000. That's the basic steps with honing the chisels. And that's very important to do because by doing that, it was very easy to chop out this material. And I would probably say the mahogany, believe it or not, it was a little denser than the hard rock maple. This is a subspecies called sapele, and it is denser than regular mahogany. And I exclusively, get all of my lumber from a company out of Buffalo, and I'm going to give them a nice shout out right now. They are called Richie Lou. They're out of Buffalo, New York. They deliver to me in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, and I am super thankful for it. The quality of their product is outstanding, and their customer service is great as well. And if you guys are in the area, I suggest you look them up. And they've always treated me quite right. So I get this mahogany from them, and I've always been really, really happy with it. Mahogany ranges in tones, and you got to be careful when you buy mahogany. You have to go there and make sure you're not buying Philippine mahogany or anything that's very light. You're looking for the darkest, densest stuff, and usually that shows up in African mahogany, which is just really hard to get nowadays, and also this species called sapele. So you can see me clamping my parts in and out of this vise. I'm not a traditional woodworker. I don't have a traditional bench per se with bench dogs, even though, you know, I have some bench dogs here in this pattern maker's vise. But my bench is a hydraulic lift bench. It can lift about 1,500 pounds. It's certainly not good for hand planing or anything like that because it does have a little bit of slop in it. But, you know, I just kind of work around that. But I attach this pattern maker's vise, and it's very versatile because you can clamp things and orientate them vertically like this, but you can also tilt the clamp up so it's horizontal to the ground, and the clamp spins 360, the vise, I mean, spins 360 degrees. And if you take the homosode out, there's a little pin in an oddball shaped, like basically a flat piece that gets mounted in your vise if you have to hold oddball shaped things, and that's kind of nice too. And if you flip this upside down, it has two tails that stick out, and you can grab things with that, which is also nice. And it angles up. Like I said, you can tilt it up to a horizontal position, but any angle in between as well. So that kind of comes in handy. And also raising and lowering this bench is extremely handy, so I'm not breaking my back. It also will lift super heavy cabinets up so I can work on the bottom without having to muscle things around. It does all the lifting for me essentially. So I've made good use of this. Now, when you're pairing these half pins, you got to be very gentle with your pressure because you can split that half pin right off. When you knife your tails onto your pins, that is a very important step because you do not want to draw those on with a pencil, because when you go to cut or pair your tails away, or your pins away, the knife line will lock your chisel right in place, and it eliminates your error is what it does. So it's a layout process. Now, I didn't talk about this, but I want to take a break and talk about this a little bit. Prior to cutting any of these dovetails, what I did was I put a reference mark on the inside of all the parts. Now, let me back up one more step. I cut and sized the parts accordingly. They were resawn first. That's on my channel, like I said. And then they were joined and planed on my channel as well. And then they're cut to size. And the size is based off of your compartment that you're fitting it in. This is a pretty long drawer. I think the sides are 5 inches wide, and they might be 4 inches. I can't exactly remember, but I think the front might be 5 and the sides might be 4. But it gives me a nice deep drawer, which is really what I like. And I don't really like pencil drawers, so I was looking to design something that could actually function and holds just a little bit of stuff. And that's what these are doing. Now, layout-wise, you can choose any layout you want. I like this look. That angle of those pins is a 7-to-1 ratio. You can change that to make the angle steeper or shallower. I wouldn't go much shallower than what I have, but it's really personal preference. Now, another benefit of the French-style drawer is when you're chopping the tails out, you have less material to chop through. It's only 1/4 of an inch thick. Like I said, it's economical because I can get 2 pieces out of 1 3/4 inch piece. And it's also decorative. It looks beautiful in my opinion, and it has a particular look to it. And it also is structural. You would think it'd be very flimsy with the sides being so thin, but when you add the molding onto the bottom, you bump that 1/4 inch up to about 3/4 of an inch, and it creates a lot of structure. And also it has a 1/2 inch piece of plywood in that. Has a lot to do with the structure as well. And when you're pairing these parts out right here, it's very important not to wiggle your chisel, in this case, in this orientation, front to back, because you can mar the front shoulder. And also when you're cutting the front shoulder, you don't want to move your chisel side to side, because you can also mar the pins. I dread cutting dovetails, and that's why I do samples, so I can get my mind right. And I'll tell you, you need to clear your mind and make sure you're in a good place mentally, and make sure you're not going to be distracted. You don't want to cut these partially, leave, and then come back and continue to cut these. When you're cutting these, you want to cut this process You want to do it all at once in the same day, so it's done. Now, after my parts were cut to size, the next most important thing is orientating them. On the drawer front, I just look at I pick the best grain direction, and I choose it accordingly. And in this case, I have a pendant style pull that goes in there, so I had to recess a hole in the back. So I don't necessarily need a reference line on here because I have that hole, and it tells me that it's going to recess that bolt for this camshaft that holds my decorative deco styled pull. And then I do the same thing for the backs and the back and the sides. And what I do is put a reference mark on the front, backs, and sides. And then I'll go to the front, whichever corner you want to start. It doesn't really matter. In my case, I think I started the front left. I put orientation marks on the top. So I'll go 1, 1. Then I go to the right front corner, 2, 2. The back right corner, 3, 3. And the back left corner, 4, 4. And what this does is it always ensures that your parts are going to be orientated correctly, because it's very easy to get confused during this process and to misorientate something and to cut it on the wrong part, and you do not want to do that. So orientation basically keeps the layout in front of you and assures that you're going to cut the correct parts. So I am just trying to get everything situated with this first corner, and once I get the first corner done, I'll go to the other side of the drawer face, and then from there I'll work back to the back side through dovetails, which are a lot easier because they're smaller. But preparation is key, because when I'm paring these out, I am not guessing. I'm letting my chisel sit inside of that knife line. And you can see me double checking. The reason I'm doing that is I want to make sure I'm not going to cut too much material away. Now, I'm definitely probably being too fussy, and it's costing me a bit of time, but my clients pay good money for these pieces, and I want to make sure that they are top-notch joinery wise and craftsmanship wise. And these drawers really turned out nice. I was super happy with them. So it looks like I'm on the middle pin. Now when I'm chopping down, and I'm lucky here because for the most part this drawer is fairly straight grained. The sides are even fairly almost quarter sawn, because I was able to take them out of the board. They weren't true quarter sawn boards, but I was able to cut out the more quarter sawn part of that board, if that makes sense, because I love quarter sawn material. And it's more stable, and I like the way that it looks. But you still have to read the grain direction as you're cutting down, because sometimes in even straight grain it'll tail one way or the other, and that's really true on the half pins, especially on the back. You got to be very delicate. So if your grain tails away and you think you're going to split that half pin off, you're going to want to pare from the back to the front, not straight up and down. When I go off camera, I'm paring the tails. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at, remember I said it's very easy to crack this tail piece right in the corner of the tails if you're not careful. So I'm looking at the back to see if I've dented anything, or that tells me how heavy I am and really what I have to take away. And then I adjust, accordingly. So in the video, you'll see me paring both down and across. Now, on this part, you don't have to worry about you're going the whole way through to the shoulder. But on the back, you don't have a shoulder because it's not a half blind dovetail, it's a through dovetail. So when you're paring those backs, you want to pare half of it at a time and not punch your chisel through the thickness of the material. And you need probably a little thin chisel to clean out the corners, but I I am making sure that that shoulder in the front is not pushing my part out at all. And I'm making sure that my pins are not cracking my tails. See, I'm figuring out, looks like I'm on the third pin, figuring out where I'm at and what to trim away. And I'm pairing the tails right here. Almost down to the last half pin. You can see I'm marking it right now. There's the special custom, really nice thin marking knife that I made. Now that has both angles on it, but it's flat on the back side. So there's a bevel on one side, but there is no bevel on the other side. It's flat and it's honed to 10,000 grit. It's very nice for really thin dovetails. My Japanese marking knife is too thick to get into certain things. Now it looks like I'm paring out the front shoulder. It's possible that front wall, if it's not perfectly 90 degrees, it'll make your seam heavy where the end grain butts into the front shoulder, if that makes sense. So that front wall needs to be very accurate. This is this front joinery is by far the most important joinery of the whole project. However, you don't want to have sloppy through dovetails on the back side. And remember, everything can, for the most part, be fixed. I'd say the things that are very hard to fix is if you were to clamp this up and you've got a crack. That's hard to fix. Maple is very hard to repair because it's a white material. So taking the time on the fitting part is, in my opinion, very important. It looks like I'm paring out the last bottom half pin. And the general rule is if you can get half the thickness in, you are pretty good, and you don't see any cracks, you should be pretty good the whole way. But that really didn't work out for me in this case. It kind of fought me the entire way down. And it looks like I'm still off somewhere. You can kind of see the reflection in my chisel. That's a result of how high a grit I went in terms of when I was honing my tools. Now, I know I only went to 10,000, but I didn't lap this on a piece of leather. You can go to 16,000 grit and take it off and lap it on a piece of leather, and it's even sharper with like a rubbing compound. I'm sorry, a buffing compound, and that will really shine your chisels up and make them sharper. But tool preparation, there's no substitute for it. You will suffer if you try to cut dovetails with dull chisels. And I'd say, you know, what's awesome about hand-cut joinery is you don't need machines to do it, for the most part. You need to prep your stuff on machines, but you don't need to cut them on machines. And having said that, you can cut some of these on a table saw. However, you wouldn't be able to cut that layout on the back because they're too small. The thickness of a blade's about 1/8 of an inch. And you're a little limited in terms of how thin you can make the pins, but you can cut through dovetails on the table saw very accurately. Now, you can also cut You could also cut this on the Panto router. However, they don't make bits that small, and you're limited to, I think it's an 8-degree bit or a 9-degree bit. I can't remember. If I could get a bit that small, I would have no problem doing this on the Panto router. I have cut half-blind dovetails on the Panto router before, but this dovetail is completely cut by hand. So what I'm saying to you is, you don't necessarily have to do it by hand if you don't want to. You can speed up the process by introducing some machines. If you've never cut a hand-cut dovetail drawer by hand, I suggest you do it just to see how much work's involved and to give you an appreciation of the process. But lots of people have little tricks here and there that make things go a lot smoother. And another little trick is I've seen people tilt the bandsaw table and cut their dovetails on, well, not the half blinds, but through dovetails. They can rough the material out on the saw generally. And when you're doing any of that, if you bump any of your parts, you know, you'll obviously have to fix them. So there's a little bit of risk if you're going to do that. But there are techniques and steps you can do to help speed the process up. My most important consideration here is accuracy for my client, not necessarily time. I'm sure I'd feel a little differently if I was really behind the gun and behind on this project, but I'm not. Now, prior to even laying this out, I had done a drawing, so I knew kind of what my drawer was going to look like. And again, I suggest you do the same. On my video, there is a couple shorts of me cutting an angled dovetail for a flag display that I made for a friend of mine, a friend of mine's parents. And the same thing applies. I cut a sample first before I cut that. Now, these are pretty basic dovetails in the world of dovetails. I think if you get into the Japanese sunrise dovetails, you're getting into the complex side of, which I want to try to cut at some point. I want to learn how to cut those. There's houndstooth dovetails. That would mean if I had houndstooth in here, there would be little small pins in the spaces that go about halfway the length of my current pins. I almost tried one of those, but I chickened out. So there's all kinds of other fancy dovetails. I suggest you go online and look, and you'll be amazed at what's out there. But, you know, for drawer work, half-blind dovetails are fantastic. The half-blind means they don't, when you close the drawer, you cannot see the end grain on the piece. Through dovetail means when you close the drawer, you can see the end grain because it comes through the entire piece. It's important to make sure you're 90 degrees when you're chopping these down. If you lean the chisel back, you'll have an angled wall, and that will prevent you from fitting your part accordingly. Now it looks like I'm getting close. And I still think there's a couple little things that I have to mess around with. It looks like I'm checking it out. I'm well below half. Well, looks like there was something on there I didn't like, and that looks like the front shoulder is just a little bit out on the bottom. I believe I messed with this for a little bit. Yep, and I'm just making sure that's straight. Sometimes if your chisel's not angled correctly or you're tilting it back, you can create a, on the bottom of that shoulder, that can hold out your maple tails. So that's what I'm doing right here, is making sure I'm at 90 or just a hair back or a little bit undercut. But you do not want a huge undercut there. So the process of paring is chopping the excess down and then coming back like this and paring it away. This is a safe way to do it if your grain on your face grain is such that you can't chop down. You would pare across the pin like that. And fitting once again, and it looks like I'll have to adjust again. Let's see where we're at. And I'm looking at the back side because something's still holding me up. And I can tell I've got a very good fit here. I mean, obviously I saw the drawer, and you'll see the drawer at the end. And the main benefit of using maple on the back, well, most traditionally people use maple on the back because it's a harder material and it runs quite well, but I could see using white oak or something like that as well. But the other benefit is it gives you a nice color contrast. So for the end grain of the sapele will really pop against the lighter colored hard rock maple. If you do your drawers correctly and you fit them correctly and you glue them correctly, they will last 100 years. The dovetails are mechanical. If they're fitted correctly, they will still hold your joinery together. I find that fascinating. You know, you never really know longevity-wise how things are going to wear until you've built a couple and you've lived with a couple of pieces, and you figure out what works and what doesn't, and you change things accordingly to make your products better. And that's what I've always done. Just try to do the best you can, that's all. It looks like this front pin is giving me some trouble along with the front shoulder. But hopefully I can get past this part pretty soon. Coming back into that corner, paring down on the front shoulder. Refitting. And look, oh, I misorientated my piece, which is what I was trying to tell you guys earlier, why you must have your orientation pieces off. I get confused too. And those orientation marks keep me straight. If I were to flip that part, it would be a disaster because my fit wouldn't be as good. Now it looks like I'm looking at the shoulders of the tails and making sure that there's no excess in the corners or the shoulder isn't domed in any way. Let's see where we're at. Should be getting pretty close here. Now let's see where we're at. On my cabinet mallet, I've got it lined with rubber so I'm not crushing my material. You certainly don't want to use you can use a hammer with a block of wood, that's fine, but if you're going to do it full time, a cabinet hammer comes in handy, which is, I believe that was my first project at RIT. I still have it. when I was in the grad program. And this front shoulder here is just giving me a little bit of trouble. And I can see that I have a gap, and I am not a gap on the tails or the pins, but a gap on the shoulder where it's supposed to be tight. So by adjusting this, that will pull that in, and that's what I'm looking for right here. And if it's not right, I take it off and I readjust the shoulders accordingly until I get it to be extremely tight. And just making sure. Now, here's a good example. When I'm paring through, I'm only paring halfway on the shoulder. I don't go the whole way through because I can blow the grain out on the back side. Okay, on a through dovetail like this, on a pin, you want to pare halfway and turn around and pare the opposite way. And I can tell something's still off, and I know I'm getting close. This shoulder must be off just a little bit. And I'm working my way down, making sure that it's tight. Let's see where we're at. Could be that I could be stressing that little half pin. I might have to take some more material off of that. Hard to tell from here, but it looks like I've got something going on still. Like I said, I will flip it over and read. Like if I have heavy rub marks on the tails, I will come back and take some of that excess off, is probably what I'm doing right now. And there's a good example of trimming across the pin itself. You do that when you have issues with grain direction and you're worried you might pop it off or whatever. There's the right there where you don't want to try to avoid doing that because you can dent that little pin. I obviously must not have done it, so if you, let's say your fit isn't good, what you're going to do is you're going to take your excess material that you cut out, either the wenge or the maple. Let's say you're off on the maple. You need to basically fill it with the same material. Do not mix sawdust and glue together. That will look horrible when you put finish on it, and it'll stick out like a sore thumb. Ideally, you don't want to have to fix anything. You want to be so good with your saw that you don't need to pare or trim. I'm just not good enough with my saw. I don't do it enough to be good enough. That comes with time. The better you are, the better off you are. So it looks like, let's see, what am I going to do here? Looks like I'm pretty close. Hopefully I'm on to the other corner. Maybe not. Let's see. It looks like I might be cutting the shoulder of the tail. All the little things that I'm doing don't really seem like a big deal, but they play big dividends when you go to glue them up. They ensure that everything's going to come home tight. Now I'm banging, but I am being gentle. I am not just smashing this down, because you will crack your maple if you're not sized correctly. And again, the half pins are the vulnerability. The bottom one's very durable because it's got so much excess, but the top one is pretty delicate, to say the least. And I certainly love the way that these look, I'll tell you that, proportionally. And I chose to make the front thicker so that I could get this look with the pins. If I was to make it 3/4 of an inch thick, the pins would be 1/4 of an inch shorter, and I just didn't like the way that looked. But definitely in general, I'm very happy with the aesthetics of this drawer. Now I should be on to the other side of the drawer front at this point. Let's see where I'm at. No, it looks like the same orientation. Looks like I am just doing some minor adjustments. I'm very close here to being done with this corner. Still a little bit heavy, unfortunately. You definitely have to be patient when you're doing this process. There's my orientation marks helping me out again. Now I think I just have a little thing on the shoulder of the tail that I have to get here, if I'm not mistaken. Whatever I did up here, I didn't do it well because I keep coming back to it. This shoulder line right here that I'm chopping down, it must be perfect. It will show up if it's not. So when you're cutting that with your marking knife, you'll want a nice clean line. You certainly don't want more than one line. And refitting, seeing where I'm at. This corner definitely gave me a lot of trouble. Normally it doesn't take this long.
What is holding me up here?
Sometimes things work out like that. Like I said, the most important thing is the result. Looks like I'm still heavy. I'm adjusting something on the tails. Oh, it looks like I'm cutting the top of the tails right now. Let's see where we're at. See how I flip the hammer on one side's not lined? If I hit it with the side that's not lined, I'll mar my material up. You don't want to do that. You don't want to have to steam dents out and make your life any harder. I'm not going to lie, dovetails are intense. They're certainly not for everybody. Try not to get frustrated. And always do a sample so you can help yourself figure out what's going on. When I get to the end of the video and I do the glue up, you'll see my sample sitting right next to it. I even pointed out. And for me, that took all the guesswork out. And I knew exactly how I wanted to lay it out after that. Looks like there's just some little stuff in the corners holding me up. If you notice my chisel, that's the only Japanese chisel I have. I unfortunately can't afford them. They are the best. The quality of the steel is better. And they have that hollow grind on the backside. I enjoy that tool because I can get in tight spots with it. I think that's 1/8 of an inch. But my chisels are very boring and mid-range, at least, probably lower mid-range. They're marble chisels, and the steel is fairly mild on them. When you're getting chisels, you want to, really the best chisels will be Damascus, the Japanese style chisels, and they are not a cheap date, but again, they are worth it. I'm hoping to get a little set of those down the road. But if you tune your tools properly, they will do just fine, just like mine did. The difference is in the harder steel, the edge will last longer, if that makes sense. So you pay for what you get in this world. But having said that, I have the mid-range tools, and oh, now I'm on to the back. So that must have been the second half. First half is really no different. Now I'm on to the through dovetails, and the fitting process is the same. Now, I might have mentioned this, but I'm not a good sawer, so I always saw heavy and pair, and I always get really good results. Now, the really good guys, they won't mess around with that because you can cut a lot of time out if you're very good with your saw. And I suggest, practicing and trying to achieve that, because the pairing process can be a little bit tedious. I start with the top half pin. The top half pin and the bottom half pin are extremely vulnerable. You want to make sure you read your grain direction on the face when you're chopping straight down. And when I'm doing the shoulder, I only go halfway. And the same thing when I'm pairing across, I go halfway and I turn around. Ideally, I want to come down, and I think for the most part I do, except for the bottom pin, which gave me some trouble. If the grain tails out, I think on this piece it tails out towards the bottom, you can knock that piece right off really easily, so you'll want to pair that across if that is the case. Nice thing about quarter sawn stuff is it keeps the grain straight, and you can get away with chopping up and down. Being able to adjust and read the grain accordingly is important to be successful, not just in this, but all kinds of cutting operations, joining, planing, table sawing. Probably more important for joining and planing. And also for hand planing. You want to make sure you hand plane in the right direction, or you'll end up getting tear out. So I am pairing something on the tail off camera here, and then I realign it and mark it accordingly. Now, this traditional dovetail drawer, if you look close at this, I can't remember which pin it is from this because I can't exactly tell, but one of them is flat on the bottom. One of the half pins is flat on the bottom, and that is actually the bottom of the back. And the reason it's flat is it sits directly on the piece of plywood. So when you're laying your dovetails out, the bottom pin has a flat bottom and a angled top. The rest of them are angled in both directions, including the top. And you can kind of see the bottom right here. If you can notice that cut on the bottom where it's got about a ½ an inch below the last half pin on the right, that's flat. That's where the drawer bottom will come out. Learning your pressure and how and when to not push takes quite a while, but in general and as a whole, you want to really finesse these. And there I'm paring the shoulder out. See how I'm not pushing all the way through? And making sure I'm not tearing out the back side of the grain on the back. So really alignment and chopping. I've started with the top half pin. I work my way all the way down to the last half pin, pairing appropriately. Also, what takes a long time is learning how to keep your chisel 90 degrees. It's very easy to taper your pins or tails, which is why having your layout lines helps and why I recommend that. But again, that is something over time that you will learn how to do. Even if, let's say your layout line was heavy and you cut it away, you can either redraw it out or you can just eye it on. And the more you do this, the more you're able to keep your chisel in the right orientation. But you're looking for a totally dead flat face across and down, and a flat knife line on the top. And when you're paring down, so that top edge can't be domed or anything. And the knife lines prevent that from happening. So I keep stressing it. Layout is very important for success. Let's see, which one am I on now? Am I on the third pin? I can't tell. No, it looks like I think I'm still on the second one. Check the alignment.
Doesn't look straight.
And then I pair accordingly. Now I'm on the third pin. Right now I'm feeling that knife mark with the chisel, so I can have a nice straight line on the top. I didn't talk about it, but this type of drawer is called a runner kicker style drawer. So the runner would be the bottom part of the drawer and the kicker would be the top part. And inside the cabinet I made a custom crib that it's like an L, and the L only comes up about an inch onto the bottom of the drawer. So if I do have a problem, I don't have to hand plane the entire side. And then the kicker part runs off the underneath of the top. Traditional runner kicker drawer. There's also a type of drawer called a side hung drawer. I have done a number of those, but I learned over time I hate the groove. What you would do is side hung drawers have a groove plowed into the side of them, and then you use a little piece of wood and you insert that inside of your cabinet, and that's what the drawer runs on. I don't like that because you only have, also I'm fighting for space here, and I don't want to have just 1/8 of an inch of material left on the sides. But if your sides were thicker, you could easily do side hung. The runner kicker is much smaller and has a tendency to wear out, where the bottom and top of the drawer aren't going to wear out. That's why I don't like runner kicker, or I'm sorry, the plowing the groove in the side. I don't like seeing that when you pull the drawer out. That side hung method. One advantage of the side hung method is you can make your drawers quite a bit narrower and you don't have to deal with expansion and contraction. With this style, runner kicker style drawer, you do have to understand your expansion and contraction and know what season you're in so your drawer doesn't swell shut. I'm looking to see where I'm at, looking at the backside, seeing where I have to pair. There's a very good example. That is a very delicate spot on this. So I'm going across. And then I'm not going the whole way through. Watch what I'll do with a chisel. In a second here, I turn it around and come from the other side. Now there's a shot of me coming from the other side. That's the correct way to do it, to not get tear out. Again, you don't want to come through the front of your drawer, or I guess in this case the inside of your drawer. You don't want to tear out on either face, which is why I'm changing the direction of the cut. I think I'm getting pretty close at this point. Just seeing where my fit is. Oh, don't hit your finger. Looks like there's something that I don't exactly like. So I'm looking at the backside to see if my pins are too big or where I'm hitting. I didn't mention this, but the tails, the shoulders, and the tails themselves have to be 90 degrees. They cannot be domed. It's not a huge deal if they're cupped, but if they're domed, they'll keep the outside surface that's visible. They'll create a gap, and you don't want that. So that little marking gauge knife that I have, that helps with these tails to make sure that they're flat the whole way across. Let's see where I'm at. Almost there. Looks like I'm taking it apart. Now I believe I'm on the other side, the last corner. There's that little knife, thin knife line in action. It's very, very handy. Now, to point out on that knife line, or I'm sorry, the knife itself, like the angle that's on the front, you want that angle to be shallow and long. If it's narrow and stubby, you won't be able to reach all the way back, especially if you have a longer tail or pin. So that's why they have a longer, shallower angle on the front of that marking knife. I see guys using X-Acto knives sometimes to mark this out. You don't want to do that. Those are beveled on both sides. You want to either make your tool yourself or buy one that's flat on one side, and then you can hone it and sharpen it accordingly. But basically, really the process repeats itself from corner to corner. The half lines are no different from each other, and neither are the through dovetails. I start at the bottom in this case, and I work my way all the way to the top. And you can see me double checking and making sure I know where I'm cutting. Mark, mark, whoops. Get my alignment right, mark, and then chop accordingly. Looks like I've got some paring on the tails here. You know, I would say that this process will be significantly harder if you're, and I don't know why you would use super figured drawer stock, because you'll never see it. But if let's say that this was fiddleback maple right here, this will be tougher to trim out because figure has a tendency to tear out really easily, especially when you're milling it. And here's a little trick. This is unrelated to what we're talking about, but let's say you have some super quilted or figured material and you're joining it and you're getting horrible tear out. What you want to do is get extremely hot water in a rag, and you wipe your piece down with hot water in a rag, and then when you rejoin it, that will prevent it from tearing out. Nice little trick that was taught to me. In this case, we don't have to deal with that because it's nice straight grain maple. And you can see me working my way down. Now watch, I'm using the tip to align me. The tip of the chisel is sitting directly in that knife line. As soon as it comes in contact with the knife line, it locks itself in. That's why you have to knife stuff in. Or that's why I'm recommending that you do. You're going to find out what works best for you. I don't really care what you use as long as your accuracy is very good. But if you're finding that you're getting inaccurate results, go online and see what the guys are doing besides myself and make the appropriate changes. Here, this is such a delicate part. I'm being extra careful. Now, obviously, I'm not going to drive everything down all the way. I'm just looking at my fit right here. And once I think I'm close, I'm going to come back and pare all that excess out on the shoulder. See where I'm at, pare that tail accordingly. You'll see rub marks. So if I'm using maple and I'm too heavy, I will get like a really dark orange tan, almost a dark orange with some black in it, tan from the parts rubbing. You can look at those rub marks and take them off accordingly. Just on your tail side, you want to make sure you don't go through the front. In other words, when you're paring that, you want to, your top tail is the exact shape that you need. You make sure you keep that and you pare down towards the inside of the part, if that makes sense. On the tails we're talking about. There's the main face of the tails right there. I would want to go down and not take any width away from the tail angles themselves, because if I do that, I'll make them sloppy. This process ensures that when you glue everything up, it goes smoothly and that you don't have any cracks and nothing gets popped off. And the worst thing you can do is glue this up and then have mistakes. Looks like I'm heavy somewhere, so I have to adjust it accordingly. And now I am paring the tail off camera here for a second, or probably checking the shoulders. And working my way hopefully back here in a second. Taking the time to get it right. I'm sure I'm double checking the shoulders and the actual faces of the tails on the inside, making sure that I'm not domed or cupped, making sure my shoulders don't have any excess in the corner, making sure they're not domed. Still messing with the tails on this part. Now I'm going to recheck my fit. See how I keep flipping it over? That's me checking my fit. That tells me if my pins are too thick or my tails are too small. You either take the pins down or the tails. It really doesn't matter as long as you keep your fit tight. However, you don't want to have different size pins and tails. You really want everything to be uniform. So it's just a process of going back and forth until the fit is correct. Now, once I think it's correct, you'll see me come down and turn the chisel around and pare out all that excess that's hanging out there on the pins themselves. Paring something out on the tails again. Making sure everything is correct so I can get this part back on here and get it correct and get everything paired out accordingly the way that it needs to be done. There's something in there that I don't like, so I'm double checking the shoulders. And here we go. I must like what I'm seeing, so now I'm going to pare this excess material away. You can kind of see just truing up this little guy. Right here is where you need to be delicate. You can crack that off real easy. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. Obviously, when you're well, I don't know about obviously, but just so you know, when you're chopping down, you don't want to mar your shoulder. You don't want to chop into your shoulder. You want to chop up to it when you're coming down. So if you leave your chisel marks, those will be visible. You don't want that. And this is a pretty good shot of me taking the excess material away. That process of paring it is exactly what I'm doing. You're taking, basically you're choking up on the chisel and you're slicing with the chisel. I'm kind of breaking my rule and going the whole way through, but I must be taking a really light cut. And the last thing I'm going to do is get my top shoulder. That's what you would see on the back side of the drawer. There's a knife line there as well. Watch, see how I slide the chisel right into it? Boop, and it lines the chisel perfectly. Careful. There it is. Well, let's see where I'm at. Just double checking, making sure nothing's gonna hold me up. If you have a little bit of excess in the corner, that can hold that can create a gap along the seam, and you don't want that. If you were to put a little square inside of everything on all the shoulders, everything should be square. Looks like something's still a little heavy. I know I'm getting close at this point. And once I get this done, what I will do is start fitting the drawer together on camera for you. And then it gets banged back apart, cleaned up, and ready for the glue up process. Looking to see where I'm at. I'm sure I'm starting to like the way that's looking. Looks like I'm driving it home. Now what I'm doing is fitting the whole drawer together, roughly. I'm not totally banging the shoulders all the way home. It's mostly home just to show the camera what the fruits of my labor look like and what the actual joinery in the front's going to look like. And the glue up's not any different. You put glue on the bottom piece and you fit one half at a time. You glue one corner at a time, and then you have to glue both corners at once. So I'm banging the back on right now, the back corner on I mean, and now I work to my front. And then I'm going to go back on camera and talk a little bit about the drawer. I flip the drawer over and Do the same thing to the other half blind dovetails. When I'm pounding these in, it's very important that you pound evenly across. You don't want to crush one corner in and then go to the opposite corner, because you can dome or bow your sides and you will crack your sides doing that. I've got a little more fitting to do, but that kind of gives you the basic rough idea. In terms of a half blind dovetail, some of the steps, you know, the only thing that I don't do that the really good guys do is they'll come down and coping saw this material out. You can't do it for the half blind dovetails, but you can do it for the through dovetails, both the pins and the tails. I don't do that. I just chop them out. This is so small. I appreciate all of your time. Have a good day. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everybody's having a good Friday. And today what I want to do is glue up what's called a French style drawer. Now these are high pressure glue ups. So what I'm going to do is just talk about what a French style drawer is real quick. And then I'm going to glue up without talking. And at the end, the most important thing I'm going to do is square the drawer up. And you can see I have everything prepped. I'm going to glue everything with Titebond 2. And I have about 50 minutes once I start doing it. So a French style drawer is basically a fancy type of drawer. And this is my sample. This is kind of what the corner will look like. It's actually upside down, but that doesn't matter. But anyways, usually it has really thin sides, about 1/4 of an inch thick. And traditionally the groove is plowed in the front, and then you use a fancy piece of molding and you glue this in and it holds the drawer bottom. I'm just going to glue this up and hopefully it comes out okay. So wish me luck. While I'm doing this process, I am just doing one corner at a time. Do not paint every corner all at once. If you do each corner at once and you're starting like I am on this corner, all the rest of those corners will be drying and waiting for their turn, and you can freeze your joint because the glue can tack up and you can have trouble with that. So I only glue one corner at a time for the first step, and then the second step I do the half blind and the through dovetails all at once because I have to pound that part on at the same time. Like I mentioned, it might not have been clear, the glue I'm using is Titebond 2. You only have 15 minutes of open time. If you don't think you can glue your part up in 15 minutes, you will need to switch to probably something like West System epoxy. That stuff is awesome, except on maple and also really anything else. The cleanup is so hard. You can use acetone to clean it up. Excuse me, but it tends to darken the maple, and the cleanup takes forever. And this yellow glue is super easy to clean out, and sanding it afterwards is much easier. But it's whatever it is. If this drawer was much wider and taller, I might have to use epoxy. It just depends on what you're doing. And that's how I base everything off of. I use the appropriate glue for the appropriate open time that I have. On flat pressing, you'll want to, for very important big flat pressing, you'll want to use Unibond 800. You can use epoxy. Epoxy, again, is harder to fix afterwards. You could also use yellow glue. People don't recommend it on flat pressing. I use it for small things. I used to use Elmer's glue until I had a delamination, and I never have had that happen on flat pressing. I used to use that exclusively for flat pressing, and just recently I had 3 or 4 tests where it delaminated. There was not debris in there. I really can't explain it, but I just am so gun shy now that I won't use it. Titebond has a new product called Cold Press that's for veneering, so that's what I'm going to try next. I will use Titebond 2 on small things, but Unibond 800 would be the best for flat pressing. Bending's a different story. Unibond 800 works well for that. But here on this glue up, I have Type Bond 2. I don't like Type Bond 3. It's brown, number one, so I've got maple. But then I don't like the original formula either. Type Bond 3 is nice because it's waterproof. This is water resistant, but the original isn't. So I use Type Bond 2. It's whatever your preference is. Now, I could be behind the times on the Type Bond products. There might be something out there that I'm not aware of. If there is, I would find it and use it accordingly. But here is the process of the last part. And I have to paint these at once. Now, the tails and pins are very thin, so I have like a custom little art brush that I'm using to get in there, because you'll slop stuff around. And incidentally, I'm a terrible glue upper. I usually get a lot of squeeze out. Not horrible, but certainly not good. I recommend that you squeeze out when you're clamping things up. The worst thing you could do is starve your joint by not putting enough glue on. But then you don't want to cake it on to the point where you're spending so much time cleaning it up. Now, one of the very great advantages of doing this type of drawer is you don't need to glue the drawer bottom in when you're gluing this up. And it gives you a lot of flexibility cleanup wise. So after this is glued up and cleaned up, a custom piece of molding gets glued in, and then the bottom gets cut out and rabbited out and fit in, and it slides in, and then you attach it accordingly. So now what I'm going to do is bang this last part on, and I end up having a little fix right here that I have to do, but it ends up being not a big deal. You just do whatever you have to do to make it work. You'll see me grab a chisel here in a little bit, and I can tell you on the real drawer it ended up being fine. But if you noticed, I've got my workbench set up with a sheet of paper on it. If you pull this over and you pull some of the paper up, that's okay. You just use a wet rag and wipe it off. But I prepped this drawer. I have all my clamps at my feet, and I'm going to stress this to you guys, there's a video on my YouTube channel of me cutting out these custom blocks to glue this dovetail up. And you'll want to do the same. On the pins on the back side, you end up having little cawls that have little narrow spots that align with each pin. That's crucial for getting the correct pressure to drive the shoulder home. Same thing with the tails. You make custom cawls or clamping blocks to get direct pressure on the tails themselves. So that is super important, and I know some people will use softwood like pine and just not do this process and crush it in. I've never had luck doing that. I've never had luck. This has always given me really good results, and this is what I use. Everything in woodworking is trial and error. I think initially I tried to glue it upside down, but then I realized I don't want to do that. Everything's trial and error, and you always figure out the best way that meets your skill set. Now, when I did those clamping blocks, I did them so that all I would have to do is set them down and not reach across and pull them up or hold them up. And I suggest you do the same because, in my case, I'm a sole proprietor. I don't have employees. I rarely have anybody help me gluing anything up. So you have to kind of think ahead to help yourself. And these clamping blocks were designed so they just sit there like that. And that makes my life a lot easier in terms of alignment. And then the tail clamping blocks, see, I flip it over and start over. The tail clamping blocks, I shift back a little bit so I can see the seam between the sapele and maple so that it's tight. When I start to glue this up, I'm using bar clamps, and in my case, I'm using Wetzler clamps and some longer Bessie clamps. I like the Wetzler clamps are excellent. They get really, really solid pressure, but I don't care what company clamp you use. It just needs to be a bar clamp. So do not use a quick grip clamp. You will not get good pressure. The Bessies are nice because they're deeper and they can get around the clamps. You're going to see me fighting for space constantly, and that's really par for the course. And when you're doing drawer work, especially the smaller the drawer, the tighter it gets. The wider the drawer, the easier it gets in terms of spacing your clamps out. So I have 3 clamps across the back. I'll put 3 clamps across the front, and then I need to put 2 long clamps on. And that's when I, start to mess with the clamps and adjust them accordingly. And again, that's all common for this type of work. You just are constantly fighting for space. Clamp pressure is another thing you have to be concerned about. Now, these drawers are really thin, and also clamp pressure can destroy things, and I've done that in the past. But learning how to adjust your clamp pressure minutely makes humongous differences. So that kind of comes with time. A good example, if you're gluing a top and you're edge gluing a top, your clamp pressure can cup or bow those pieces depending, or make them flat. It's taken me trial and error to learn how to do that, but once you do learn how to do that, it's very beneficial, and it helps you achieve a higher rate of accuracy on your glue ups. And I'm doing all this, and I could get all these perfect. If I don't do the very last step perfect, my drawer is essentially ruined because it's sitting in a cabinet that's already square. So one of the most important things, besides the cutting, chopping, and fitting, which is very important, is making sure your drawer is square. If I was just to walk away at the end, I would have a drawer that was off. And if I were to put that off drawer in my compartment, it wouldn't align with the outside legs or the frame of the side cabinet or the side tables, which you can see in the background right there. So it is imperative that you make sure your drawer is square. And once you leave it square, you leave it like that until it sets, and then you can unclamp it. This style drawer does give you a little flexibility in terms of if you're not perfect in terms of getting it square, when you glue the bottom molding in, you have another chance to re-square it. But you really want to get it right on this step right here. And you can see how I flip the clamp around. That's so I can get my hand in there. If you put all 3 of the handles together, you're rubbing your knuckles together. So now what I'm going to do is start to, looks like I'm tightening everything, and I'm looking. When I'm doing this, I'm looking on the inside of the drawer, and I'm looking to make sure that those seams are closed and everything is home. Now what I'm going to do is glue the length. And you'll see a lot of repositioning here of the clamps. I work on the far side first, and I work back to myself. Just trying to figure out where I can get that clamp pad on. Now, these work better than bar clamps because they're deeper, and bar clamps, I find I have a real hard time getting them in there because the bar clamp depth is only like 2 inches maybe, and I think these are like 3 or 4, 3.5, 4 inches, so they are kind of nice in that regard. They do have a tendency to stick a little bit, which can be frustrating when you're trying to adjust them. Again, when I'm doing this, I'm looking at my shoulders on the front and on the back. You obviously won't be able to see it from the outside, but you can see it from the inside. Now, I think I get a little overzealous here, and I end up cranking it, and there's a real danger that I can flex those sides in, which did happen, so I end up going back and readjusting my clamp pressure. You can see how much adjustment's going on with the clamps, just to allow the long clamps to be placed on there. There's even more coming when I put my diagonal clamp on to make this drawer square. And then I work back to myself, and I'm gonna work to get these two clamps on. And before I go to square up the drawer, what I'm going to do is fill up some water with a little bit of with a rag and an acid brush, and that's how I'm going to clean these corners out. Now remember, I was talking about the benefits of this French style drawer. One of them is this step when you're gluing it up and it doesn't have a drawer bottom in it. If you have your drawer bottom in, you typically have squeeze out coming down and hitting that surface, and you can clean that out with water, but you want to make sure, especially in maple, that you wipe the excess out, because it can create mold and you cannot get it out. So without the drawer bottom in, it just makes the cleanup so much faster. And afterwards, if you do have the drawer bottom in, when you go to re-sand that out, it's tough to get in there. It's tough to get into the corners and get that little watermark out. So that works out for me pretty good. Now I'll put this clamp on and I end up changing it like 5 times to figure out where I'm at. Now I'm looking at the shoulders to make sure that I'm tight. And now I realize, oh, don't bow the side in, so I'm adjusting my pressure accordingly. Still adjusting. There's something I don't like. Now I'm ready to clean up. So I'm gonna just fill up a little bit of water, and then I come back with a rag and an acid brush, and then I attack the corners and I make sure I get them perfectly cleaned so there's no glue residue in there. Doing this will save you hours of work. You can leave it and come back with a chisel and try to cut it out. But a lot of times you end up marring the drawer, inside of the drawer, and because the glue is so hard, and it's just really hard to get out. So the other benefit of Type On 2 is I can just use water to clean it up, and it's very nice. And so you'll see me painting on water, getting the excess glue off, rinsing out the brush, and then whatever excess water is left over, I'm coming back with that rag and wiping it down. So I had no trouble gluing this up within the allotted time. And just keep that 15-minute open time in mind when you're working with Type Bond or any white or yellow glue. So I just work corner to corner, and then I can actually get up underneath because the drawer bottom's not in, and that's kind of nice. I don't have to come in with my chisel to clean that up. You know, I will come back and have to hard block this to clean it up. And then what I do for the backs of my drawers is I use Renaissance wax or paste wax, and then the front I put, in this case, the front and the top are going to have polyurethane on it, satin polyurethane. The reason I use wax on the back is that I want it to run smoothly. And the same thing, the wax will be on the runners inside of the sapele side tables. Looks like I'm still readjusting. And I know that I'm not done cleaning this yet. What I think I end up doing is doing the inside corners, wiping the excess out, then I go and I take time to clean out the outside front corners. I can't get to the back corners because they're completely covered with cawls or clamping blocks. See, there's me wiping the excess out, going underneath and getting that little bit, which is kind of nice. Cleaning the excess, wiping any residual water off. Still in the process of cleaning out the glue. Making sure you wipe that excess out is important, especially on the maple. You want to make sure you get any, not excess, but like standing water. You don't want your parts to be damp. You want to wipe off all excess water. The maple can create, believe it or not, mold if you leave it like that. Now what I'm doing is taking this clamp off because I know I'm going to have to get a diagonal clamp on here. I think I go and readjust this. All this readjusting is normal. The amount of clamps is normal. If you're not using this many clamps, I don't know what to say. I'd like to see your results. If you're getting better results than this, more power to you, but I just don't trust that. You cannot replace clamp pressure. Now I'm just double checking my pressure and getting things set the way I need to set it. I am adjusting and readjusting accordingly. The way you're going to check this square is with a tool called a sliding bevel. It's just a ruler that folds up, and you unfold it, and the end has a brass numerical inch value part that slides out, and you fold the excess, whatever your length of your folding rule is, you fold the back side up so you can get into your corner, and then you slide your brass part into the corner holding it, and you check the other side, and that's the tool you use to check for square. It's called a sliding, or I'm sorry, it's called a folding rule. I have some minor cleanup here. I'm doing the outside half blind dovetails because I think I have some excess there and I want to get that out. And then I do the opposite side. And you'll know that I'm good on my cleanup when I take my water away. And at that point, I'm going to pull out the sliding rule and check to see if my drawer is square or not. Don't panic if your drawer is not square. Usually it isn't. You cannot tell clamping this up whether you're square or not visually because it looks square. But trust me, if you don't do this and you don't square this up, in my case, I could fit this in and the left side could align perfectly. And then I look at the right side and all of a sudden I'm like, why is this sticking out 1/8 of an inch? The reason it's sticking out 1/8 of an inch is the drawer's not square. So try to not have that happen to you if you can avoid it. So I think I like what I'm seeing here, and you can see me unfolding the folding rule here. And watch, I fold the back side back so I can get into the corner. Slide the piece of brass forward, and now I'm going to hold on to that piece of brass. Now, when you get new ones, they're pretty stiff, and you don't have to do that, but mine's a little bit worked in. It's not totally sloppy, but just to ensure I'm accurate in getting a correct reading, I hold it. So now I know where my longest length is, and you'll see me trying to figure out how to adjust my clamps. You'll be doing the same thing.
How do I do this? How do I get this guy on here with all these clamps on? Because when you clamp that, you don't want to mar your drawer. You want to use the clamping blocks that you already have on there. And this does not require a lot of pressure. I would say if you're off more than I was off, you probably have an issue with the size of your parts. Certainly if you're off by 1/2 inch, you got a major problem. But in my case, I wasn't. You see how I'm folding these clamps in and out to get the space that I need? Now I take that one Bessie clamp off just to get this in the spot that I need. And you'll see stuff falls apart on me. It's very easy to get frustrated here. You want to really take your time. The worst thing you can do is lose your patience and get upset. It doesn't do any good. And in my case, I'm doing this by myself. I don't have a second set of hands. I recommend a second set of hands always if you can, but in my case, I can't. And if you're the same as I am, just take your time. I've got pressure on here. I'm past the open time. I really don't need to panic, and I'm not. And that comes with time. I've had bad glue-ups before that didn't work out, or I did something wrong. Well, see, it's very easy to get frustrated like that. But you just adjust accordingly. Now it looks like I'm putting the pads on the clamping blocks. And once I get them aligned, you'll see me tighten the bar clamp. Now, you can over tighten. If you do, you just use your sliding rule to tell you where to go. You might have to loosen the clamp to come back. When you're pulling, whatever your distance is, 1/8 of an inch in my case, I pull a 1/16 out to compensate for both sides. So now you're going to see me checking it and rechecking it until I get it perfect. I don't even like a 30-second. I like to have it perfectly square. See, I think I'm backing my clamp pressure off. And I'm checking and rechecking, and I'm making sure that there's no way that I'm off. And before I end this, I just want to thank whoever is still watching this. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you guys. Now it's square. All that fussing around moving of clamps has to do with clamp pressure, making sure I can get my diagonal clamp on here so I can pull this drawer square, because it's very important that it's square. Cosmo Barbaro with Cosmo Barbaro Furniture, and today I want to show you real quick this French style drawer that I've been working on. And it's got half-blind dovetails on the side. It's got a nice decorative deco style pendant pull out of rosewood, and it's a traditional hand-cut dovetail drawer. And by traditional, you see how the back is spaced down from the sides. That allows airflow when the drawer runs. And this is a French style drawer. It's got 1/4 inch sides, and the inside is wrapped in this fancy molding that bumps this thickness up to over about 3/4 of an inch, somewhere in there. So it strengthens it and makes it decorative. Traditional French style drawers don't have this molding. They're just put into the front, but I like the way this looks. So